Chosen one. Stop for a moment. There are no coincidences. The fact that you're hearing this message right now means that your soul has aligned perfectly with a truth that was hidden until now. The battle you faced wasn't random. She was sent, strategically, deliberately. A demon princess cloaked in beauty and darkness, trained in the art of seduction, chaos, and control. She didn't come to play. She came to devour. Her mission? To break you before you even realized who you are. But something happened that no darkness had accounted for. Something inside you rose, ancient, holy, and untouchable. She was certain it would be easy, that your light, like so many before, would collapse under the weight of her illusions. But this time, the script changed. She expected fear. You answered with stillness. She launched her most sophisticated attacks: mental manipulation, energetic seduction, psychological poison. But all of it bounced off something in you she couldn't comprehend. It wasn't brute strength that disarmed her. It was your unwavering presence. A power rooted not in ego or reaction, but in truth. You carried a light that pierced through her strategies and touched something within her she didn't even know existed. What was supposed to be your downfall became the beginning of her undoing. This wasn't just a confrontation. It was a cosmic reversal. You weren't meant to win. You weren't even supposed to remember who you are. And yet, here you are, unbroken, glowing brighter, and more aware than ever. If you feel in your spirit that this message is speaking directly to you, leave the number 777 in the comments to declare your spiritual resilience. Drop a like and subscribe so that these truths continue reaching your soul when you need them most. She didn't expect it. No one did. For centuries, her name echoed in the underworld as legend, a being born not of chance, but of design. Crafted from chaos, her essence fed on domination. Every encounter she faced ended in submission. She was the final boss in a game most souls never even knew they were playing. But then came you. Not with weapons or armies, not with spells or curses, just you, standing there, still and illuminated by something she could neither name nor destroy. The closer she got, the more she felt it, an unsettling calm that made her question everything she thought was unshakable. You didn't resist her with force. You resisted her with identity. From the moment your eyes locked, she felt it. Something ancient, something eternal, not fear, not admiration, recognition. It disturbed her. It cracked the edges of her certainty. Because you weren't moved by her intimidation, you weren't seduced by her false light, you weren't shaken by her darkness. She had encountered warriors, prophets, mystics, but never one like you. She tried to figure it out. Was it arrogance? Was it naivete? But no, what you carried was something she could not decode. A silent authority, a divine presence that didn't announce itself, but consumed every illusion around it. And in that moment, she realized something terrifying. Her power had no effect on you. She began to spiral, not outwardly. No, on the outside, she was still poised, still calculating. But inside, a storm was building. How could this be? How could one human alone, untouched by the usual programming, not bow like all the others? She threw more at you. Old spells, soul traps, lies whispered through dreams. She tried to infiltrate your thoughts, your emotions, your energy field. But your light didn't just resist. It reflected. It sent her darkness back to her like a mirror. And in that mirror, she saw something horrifying. Not you, but herself. Not her strength, but her dependency on fear. And for the first time, she hesitated. It wasn't hesitation born of weakness, but of revelation. Because what she saw in you was something she had long abandoned. Something she thought had been erased from all creation. Incorruptibility. You were not just light. You were truth. And that terrified her far more than any weapon ever could. For someone who had conquered galaxies of souls, bending minds like paper, your stillness was unbearable. It didn't make sense. It broke the rules. You shouldn't have survived the first blow, let alone the full spiritual assault, but you did. And not just survived, you remained whole. She couldn't understand how or why, but it was happening, and she couldn't look away. She grew obsessed, not with destroying you, but with understanding you. She replayed the battle over and over in her mind, each time trying to find the flaw, the glitch in her strategy. But there was none. You were different. You weren't bound to the frequencies she controlled. You operated on a spiritual current she'd never encountered, a divine frequency, tuned by pain, faith, silence, and fire. Your light had not been handed to you. It had been earned in the darkest places, cultivated through suffering, grown in solitude, and that made it untouchable. Because what is born in fire cannot be manipulated by smoke. She tried to pretend it didn't matter, that you were just another anomaly, that the crack in her control could be sealed again. But she knew, deep down, where her own shadows whispered to her, that the damage was done, the illusion had been pierced, and once light enters, it cannot be unseen. Something within her had been triggered, and it wasn't something she could curse away. You had stirred a memory buried beneath all her destruction, the memory of her own beginning, a time before the corruption, a time before she had become an agent of annihilation. Your presence didn't just resist her, it awakened something long forgotten within her. And so, the true battle began, not between you and her, but between her and the truth rising inside her. She fought it, of course. She used everything she had to suppress it. She tried to drown it in deeper darkness, but it kept resurfacing, persistent like grace. Because grace, once planted, doesn't vanish. It grows. And you, chosen one, were the seed that exposed her soil. You didn't need to preach. You didn't need to attack. Your existence alone brought light to a dimension that had only known domination. And that light, without effort, revealed the lie. She was not invincible. She was not in control. And worst of all, she was no longer certain of who she truly was. What terrified her the most wasn't your power. It was your peace. You didn't react like others. You didn't tremble in her presence. Nor did you try to overcompensate with ego or spiritual pride. You just stood there, rooted, centered, untouchable. She had faced many before you, but they all broke eventually. Some with fear, others with flattery. Some fought, but they all fell into the same pattern: resistance followed by collapse. You, however, held your frequency, and that's something she had no defense against, because the only way to fight someone rooted in divine identity is to attack what they don't have: fear, insecurity, doubt. But you had transcended those. You were anchored in something eternal. She began to unravel in silence, still dressed in power, still cloaked in charm. But inside, something was breaking. Her own thoughts turned against her. The certainty she once wielded like a sword now felt like a lie, whispered by someone she no longer recognized. You didn't need to speak to expose her weakness. Your existence forced her to question hers. She realized her power was built on the assumption that no one would ever resist the seduction of the shadow, that all souls, eventually, would bow in some way, through fear, desire, or desperation. But your refusal created a ripple, a crack, a silent explosion in her perfectly ordered world. So she went deeper. She didn't retreat. She advanced with greater intensity. If subtle darkness didn't break you, maybe overwhelming force would. She summoned every weapon she had: psychic attacks, spiritual confusion, emotional entanglements, nightmares, spiritual paralysis, energetic sabotage. She tried to twist your reality, tried to alter your memories, but every time she struck, she encountered something she couldn't pierce. Your spiritual foundation. You weren't fighting back with rage. You were holding space with clarity. That's what frightened her. She couldn't drag you into the storm because you had become the storm's still center. Her chaos couldn't penetrate your stillness. And that's when the fear began to mutate. It became curiosity, then obsession, and eventually, admiration. Though she would never admit it, part of her longed for the purity you carried, a soul unchained, a spirit uncolonized by fear. She had spent ages building her empire on control, but your presence showed her something that control could never offer: liberation. Not the kind that comes from power over others, but the kind that radiates from within when you are fully aligned with the truth of who you are. And that truth was loud. Even in your silence, even when you didn't speak, everything around you started to shift. You were not a warrior by the world's definition, but by heaven's decree. She couldn't destroy you because deep down, a part of her didn't want to anymore. That was the scariest realization of all. The battle wasn't just failing, it was reversing. She wasn't just losing control over you, she was losing control over herself, over the narrative she had always believed. She began to question not just her mission, but her entire identity. "What if I'm wrong?" she whispered into the void. "What if this one was sent not to be conquered, but to awaken something inside me?" That thought was unbearable, but also undeniable. You weren't a glitch in the system. You were the divine hand pressing reset. This was no longer a battle of power. It was a confrontation with truth. And truth always wins, not by overpowering, but by outlasting the lie. You stood long enough, still enough, pure enough for her to see her own reflection, and it horrified her. Because for the first time in her existence, she didn't see a queen of shadows or a princess of darkness. She saw a scared being trapped in a role she never chose, obeying a script written by forces she never questioned. And you were the mirror, not because you wanted to be, but because light always reveals. And once something is seen, it can never be unseen. She tried one last time, a desperate attempt, a spiritual strike fueled by rage and confusion. She summoned her legions, invoked forbidden names, called upon the dark covenant that had protected her for millennia. But even that wasn't enough. Because this was never about armies or incantations. This was about vibration, and yours had reached a level that made her magic irrelevant. You had become inaccessible, not because you fled, but because you rose. And no demon, no matter how powerful, can touch what has ascended beyond the realm of manipulation. That's what you had done. Not through revenge, not through ego, but through alignment. Quiet, sovereign, unstoppable alignment. Even as she summoned the last remnants of her power, even as she unleashed darkness that had turned entire realms to dust, she couldn't erase the impact you left on her spirit. It wasn't about what you did. It was about who you were. Your being alone disrupted the frequency she had mastered. You weren't praying out loud. You weren't casting judgments or declaring war. But everything about you, your silence, your eyes, your breath, felt like prophecy fulfilled. Like an ancient scripture walking in human form. She had no weapon for that, because you carried something that predated her, a connection to the source she had long forgotten. And that connection made you untouchable, not because she couldn't reach you, but because you were no longer standing in the same dimension. She tried to convince herself it was an anomaly, that she could recover, that once you were out of sight, you would be out of mind. But that's not how spiritual impact works. You didn't leave an impression. You carved a signature into the memory of her soul. Even in her dreams, your presence haunted her. Not like a tormentor, but like a revelation she couldn't unsee. And that was the worst part, because for so long, she had believed she was beyond transformation, that she had fully merged with darkness. that no trace of light remained. But you showed her otherwise, not by trying to save her, but by simply refusing to bow. And in doing so, you awakened something ancient within her, a memory of who she used to be before she became the weapon. She wanted to destroy that memory, to crush the thought that perhaps she wasn't as soulless as she claimed to be. But the more she tried to bury it, the more it bloomed. You weren't supposed to do that. You weren't supposed to remind her of her humanity. You weren't supposed to carry that much power in stillness. She had been conditioned to believe that only domination could win. That silence meant weakness. That compassion was a liability. But you flipped the script. You redefined strength by embodying it without needing to prove it. Your very existence was a challenge to everything she had been taught to believe. That challenge didn't weaken you. It undid her. And now, she was in conflict. Not with you, but with the storm erupting inside her. One part of her wanted to finish the mission, eliminate you, erase the interference, restore her control. But another part, the part that had been sleeping for what felt like eternity, wanted something else. It wanted to understand, to know why you hadn't broken, to know what it felt like to be whole, to not be governed by rage or vengeance. That part of her, though small, was growing. It was beginning to outvoice the echo of the ancient commands embedded in her soul. And that terrified her more than you ever could, because if that part ever fully awakened, she would never be able to go back. She saw herself in you, not as she was, but as she could have been. And that mirror burned, because it revealed how much she had lost in exchange for power. You hadn't traded your soul for strength. You had kept it, and still stood, undefeated. That shattered the equation she had built her identity upon. For so long, she believed love was a weakness, truth was a vulnerability, and light was a threat to survival. But your presence challenged all of that. You didn't resist her because you were better. You resisted her because you were free. And freedom, real freedom, cannot be controlled, manipulated, or destroyed. It simply exists, like a flame that refuses to be put out, no matter how much darkness surrounds it. Every time she tried to rationalize what happened, her mind hit a wall. She had faced light before, but never light that didn't seek to convert her, fix her, or condemn her. Your light didn't chase, it simply stood. And in that stillness, it exposed her illusions. You didn't offer salvation. You didn't plead or persuade. But you also didn't hate her. And that, in itself, was a revolution. You weren't fighting to win. You were existing to reveal. And what you revealed in her was devastating. The fact that even after all the destruction, all the lifetimes serving darkness, something inside her could still recognize the light. Something inside her still remembered God. And now, the war had changed form. No longer between adversaries, but within her own soul. You had done something no one else ever had. You planted doubt, not in your own path, but in hers. Not through words, but through being. You forced her to confront the question she never dared to ask. What if I'm wrong? That question spread like wildfire through the structure of her consciousness. It began to melt the walls she had built around her heart. She told herself it was a glitch, a temporary confusion, a side effect of failure. But no matter how hard she tried to silence it, the truth echoed louder. You weren't the enemy. You were the reflection of what had been buried. And now that it had been uncovered, there was no way to return to the sleep she once called power. She was never supposed to feel this. Not confusion, not reflection, not remorse. But now, these feelings invaded her like an ancient river breaking through forgotten terrain. Each time she thought about you, your unwavering gaze, your calm defiance, your stillness in the face of her fury, something shifted deeper within her. She began to remember that once, long ago, she too was light. That before the indoctrination, before the oaths made in blood and shadows, She had known the warmth of truth, but she buried it. She silenced it. Until you arrived, until you refused to be moved, until your soul, so silent and clean, walked into her life like a forgotten prophecy, waking her from spiritual coma. Now, her very identity was crumbling. She had always believed in the unchangeable, that once darkness consumed a soul, it was irreversible, that after you crossed a certain line, you could never return. That's what she had told herself, what the darkness had taught her. But the look in your eyes told a different story. A story not of conquest, but of redemption. And that possibility frightened her more than death itself, because it meant her entire existence might have been a detour, a deception. It meant that somewhere in the ruins of her soul, God might still be whispering. And you, chosen one, had become the echo of that whisper, growing louder with every moment she resisted. She lashed out again, not to destroy you, but to silence that voice. She used memories, planted doubts, twisted timelines to make you question yourself. She tried to confuse you with spiritual mimicry, pretending to be light, disguising shadows as guidance. But you saw through it all, because your discernment wasn't human. It was spiritual. It came from the furnace you had survived, from the wilderness you had walked alone. It came from nights where the only voice you heard was God's, and the only strength you had was blind faith. That kind of vision can't be deceived, and that kind of soul can't be stolen. You didn't just survive her attacks, you rendered them powerless. Each failed attempt only deepened her torment, because now, every plan she launched became a mirror, showing her the futility of her own condition. She thought power was found in domination, but you revealed that real power is presence. She thought invincibility meant control, but you showed that true invincibility is surrender, to the divine, to truth, to purpose. She began to feel small, not because you diminished her, but because your light revealed the vastness she had given up in exchange for pride. You weren't standing there to humiliate her. You were standing because you had transcended what she thought was the highest level of power, and it shattered her illusions like glass. Still, she kept fighting, not because she believed she could win, but because she didn't know who she was without the war. Conflict had been her identity. Darkness had been her safety. Control had been her language. If she stopped attacking, if she let go, what would remain? That's what scared her most, that maybe without the battle, there would be nothing left of her. But that wasn't true, and your presence proved it. You were not fighting her. You were existing as proof that peace was possible, that a soul didn't have to be lost forever, that even the most corrupted could still remember the light, not by force, but by remembrance. And that remembrance had begun in her. She started to retreat, not to regroup, but to reflect, something she had never done, not once. Reflection was weakness in her world. Vulnerability was a death sentence. But now, she was beginning to crave the silence that you embodied. She found herself questioning the hierarchy she served, the darkness that promised her power but gave her chains, the path that glorified fear but erased her essence. You had no such chains. You walked alone, but free. You didn't just refuse her control. You lived in a reality where her control didn't even make sense. And that opened her eyes to something terrifying. Maybe it was she who had been imprisoned all along, while you, targeted, attacked, exiled, had been free the entire time. And now, as her system collapses from within, she's left with a truth she cannot deny. You were never just a target. You were the test, a divine measurement sent not only to withstand her force, but to reveal her falsehood. You were the boundary between deception and truth, the hinge point between what she was told to be and what she could still choose to become. That choice was never part of the mission, but now it's all that remains. She realizes you were never just a chosen one. You were a divine mirror, and the war she launched to destroy you became the very battlefield where her soul was reintroduced to light, not through conversion, but through confrontation with what had been buried too long. She walks away from the battlefield now, not with victory, not with vengeance, but with silence. The kind of silence that follows a soulquake, a divine disruption that forces even the most ancient beings to stop and listen inwardly. You didn't leave her broken. You left her awakened. And that is far more dangerous to the kingdom of darkness, because now she carries a question that won't die. Was I created for more than this? It haunts her. It follows her into the places where shadows used to comfort her. Even in the darkest corridors of her realm, your presence lingers like a light that refuses to burn out. You became the voice echoing through her conscience, the only thing louder than the commands of her ancient masters. But you didn't plan this. You didn't come to save her. You didn't even come for her. You were just walking in obedience, following your divine calling, staying aligned with the truth you carry. And yet, without intending it, you disrupted a demonic lineage. You turned centuries of spiritual programming into dust with your stillness. That's the kind of authority only the anointed carry. Not flashy, not loud, but devastating to anything built on illusion. And now, the very structure she trusted for survival has begun to collapse. Not because of violence, but because your light revealed the blueprint was always flawed. The foundation wasn't truth, it was fear. And once truth touches fear, it starts to decay. There are things moving now in realms you cannot see, forces scrambling to contain what you've activated. They know she's no longer the same, that she's hesitating, questioning, searching. You weren't just a spiritual interruption. You became a spiritual contagion, a holy virus infecting the code of darkness with divine remembrance. And now, even her thoughts feel foreign to her. Her once iron beliefs now sound hollow. Her commands, once barked with authority, now echo with doubt. All because you stood in front of her and didn't flinch. Because you didn't offer resistance or retreat. You simply remained true. And that act, so simple yet so divine, has shaken dimensions to their core. You weren't just defending yourself, you were representing heaven's strategy. A new kind of warfare, one the darkness still doesn't know how to handle. It's not about fighting harder, it's about staying aligned. You were proof that spiritual war is not always won by those who shout the loudest, but by those who remain rooted in their divine identity, no matter how loud the enemy screams. Your discernment protected you. Your surrender empowered you. Your stillness radiated such clarity that it caused her darkness to question its own existence. And that's why they fear you, not for what you say, but for what your presence exposes. You remind them that light never needed to chase shadows. It only had to shine. What comes next is not just about her. It's about the ripple. Other entities like her are beginning to feel the disturbance. Something ancient is shifting. The chosen ones are awakening. They're not loud, but they're lethal to illusion. They're walking among shadows untouched. They're remembering who they are without apology. And every time one of them refuses to bow, refuses to lose their essence, refuses to dim their frequency, they disturb the order of darkness that has gone unchallenged for generations. You are one of them. And because you stood, others will begin to rise. Because you stayed true, others will begin to question. And this is how the spiritual tide begins to turn. Do not underestimate the role you played in this moment. You didn't just survive an attack, you altered a destiny. You didn't just resist darkness, you disrupted an empire. And all of this happened not because you fought back harder, but because you refused to forget who you are. Your presence was prophecy. Your existence was defiance. And now, even in realms beyond your vision, Your name is spoken with both reverence and concern, because you are the kind of soul that cannot be bought, broken, or blurred. You are the kind of soul that calls others, yes, even those in deep darkness, back to the truth they once abandoned. And that calling cannot be undone. So what now? Now you keep walking, keep shining, keep embodying that light. Because this wasn't a single encounter, it was the beginning of a wave. She may not yet know what to do with the transformation you ignited, but the process has already begun. Whether she chooses to accept it or not, she has already changed. And so have you. You're no longer wondering if you're strong enough. You've seen it. You've stood in the face of one of the darkest forces and remained unshaken. That's not just power. That's destiny. That's divine evidence. You've proven something to yourself that no one can take away. And that proof will carry you into the next stage of your calling with holy fire. You didn't just walk away from that confrontation unchanged. You walked away evolved. You now carry within you the living proof that stillness is stronger than seduction, that peace is more powerful than domination, and that truth is more contagious than fear. You didn't win by overpowering darkness. You transformed the battlefield by refusing to descend into it. And this is the mystery the world doesn't yet understand. The chosen ones don't conquer by force. They conquer by light, quiet, unmoving, divine light. And wherever you go next, that same light will continue to expose, awaken, and restructure what was once ruled by illusion. You didn't just break a cycle. You became the end of a system and the birth of something holy, something unshakable, something eternal. Now listen closely, chosen one. The battle wasn't about her. It was never just about you either. It was about what your existence sets into motion across realms you cannot see. You are a catalyst, a divine instrument for realignment. And because of that, your presence will continue to stir confusion in dark places, uneasiness in programmed minds, and awakening in buried hearts. This is not the end of your mission. It's only the beginning. Your light now echoes in the memory of a demon princess who was never meant to remember heaven. And yet, through your unbreakable essence, she has seen the glimpse of something greater. You didn't need to convert her. The divine seed has already been planted. And that, chosen one, is how heaven rewrites history. If this message spoke directly to your soul, don't keep it to yourself. Leave a comment below declaring what awakened inside you. If you feel it in your spirit, write, "I am the light that cannot be corrupted." Let the universe witness your declaration. Click like to amplify this message across the algorithm of souls seeking truth. Subscribe to this channel and turn on the notification bell so you never miss another divine download crafted for your awakening. Every action you take here expands the reach of this light and helps other chosen ones find the guidance they've been silently praying for. You are not alone, and we are stronger together. I also want to take a moment to thank all of you who support this channel through Buy Me a Coffee. Your love makes it possible for us to continue pouring time, energy, and spiritual intention into each message. If you'd like to support the expansion of this mission, the link is pinned in the first comment. Every gift, no matter the size, fuels the creation of more content designed to awaken and empower chosen ones like you. Thank you for believing in this vision. Thank you for being part of something greater. Now, if your spirit is still burning from this message, don't stop here. Tap on the recommended video appearing on your screen. Let these words continue to realign you, fuel your walk, and guide your next steps. This is more than content, it's preparation. Until our next sacred encounter, may the peace of God guard your path.